There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs only to people like me. Not the loneliness of being alone in a room. Not even the loneliness of being misunderstood. It is the loneliness of existing in a category that the world does not quite have a proper shelf for, a designation so rare that textbooks mention it in footnotes, in parentheses, in the kind of cautious academic language that suggests even scientists are not entirely sure what to make of me. My name is Oh Jin-ho. I am 30 years old. I have pink lips that people have called too pretty for a man, pale skin that flushes easily, and dark eyes that I have been told hold too much emotion in them, like two pools that refuse to stay still. I am an omega. More specifically, I am an elite omega, which is a designation that sounds impressive until you understand what it actually means. It means everything that happens to a regular omega happens to me at twice, sometimes 3 times the intensity. The sensitivity, the instincts, the needs, the heat. My parents are both betas. Park Soo-yeon, my mother, who smells faintly of lavender fabric softener and barely anything else, and Oh Chang-wook, my father, who is the quietest man I have ever known and who cried on my 18th birthday not because I was growing up, but because he finally understood what I was growing into. Betas have no scent to speak of. They cannot detect pheromones. They exist in the world without the invisible biological language that runs underneath the surface of every alpha and omega interaction like a river current beneath still water. For 2 betas to conceive an elite omega is, statistically, an impossibility. And yet, here I am. I used to think that made me special. For a long time I thought the word miracle was the right frame. My mother certainly used it enough. "You are our miracle, Jin-ho-ya," she would say, cupping my face in her soft beta hands, and I believed her. Then I turned 22 and my first heat came, and I spent 4 days in my university dorm room alone and burning from the inside out, pressing my face into a pillow and begging for something I could not name, and I stopped thinking of myself as a miracle quite so easily. But I am getting ahead of myself. This is not a story about what I am. It is a story about who found me. I got the job at J-Sung Corporation on a Tuesday in early March, exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days after I ended my relationship with Park Hyun. I know the exact count because I had been marking time differently since then, not by calendar dates but by the small accumulations of distance between who I had been during those 2 years with Hyun and who I was trying to become without him. Every day that passed was another brick in a wall I was building with great deliberateness and a great deal of exhaustion. Park Hyun had been an alpha, a good-looking one, the kind that enters a room and tilts it slightly toward himself through sheer biological magnetism. He had pursued me with a kind of focused attention that, at 26, I had mistaken for devotion. He had smelled like cedar and dark spice, and the first time his scent hit my nose I had gone briefly lightheaded in the middle of a cafe, which he had found charming. He found many things charming about me at first. He found far fewer things charming once he understood the full reality of what an elite omega's heat meant. The frequency. The duration. The sheer consuming need that took hold of me in a way that normal omega biology cannot fully approximate. And he found nothing charming at all about the fact that even outside of heat, I was more sensitive than other omegas. More responsive to touch, more attuned to scent, more affected by proximity, my body running at a higher register than anyone around me. "You're too much," he said to me once after a particularly difficult night. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, not looking at me, his voice tired and flat in the way voices go when they are done pretending. "You know that, right? It's not normal. Even for an omega, it's not normal." "I know," I said. "It's exhausting." "I know," I said again. He left 3 weeks after that conversation. Or rather, I asked him to leave. There is a difference even if it did not feel like one at the time. So by the morning I walked into the J-Sung Corporation Tower in Gangnam with my resume folder pressed to my chest and my best blazer fitted over my shoulders. I had spent over a year rebuilding something. Not quite confidence, that was too ambitious a word for the fragile structure I had managed, but something like composure. A working model of myself that could get through a day without flinching. The lobby was all cool gray marble and sharp lighting. My heels clicked against the floor as I crossed to reception, and I remember thinking that the building smelled like ambition. The particular cold, clean scent of a place that processes a great deal of power per square foot. "Oh, Jin-ho's sigh for the executive secretary position?" the receptionist said, smiling at me with practiced warmth. "Yes," I said. "Thank you. Director Kong is on the 42nd floor. His current secretary will meet you at the elevator." I nodded and straightened my folder and walked toward the elevator bank, and it was there, waiting for the elevator doors to slide open, that I first smelled it. Faint. So faint that I almost dismissed it as imagination. Just the very edge of something, not cedar, not the warm amber of most alphas, not the mineral coolness of betas. Something I could not categorize. Dark and layered, like the bottom notes of a perfume you are not sure you like until you realize you have not stopped thinking about it. The elevator opened. I stepped inside. The scent faded. I did not think about it again. Not until I was standing in front of the director's office door. The secretary who briefed me, a small, efficient woman named Choi De-eun who was leaving the position to follow her husband to Busan, walked me through the filing system, the calendar management protocols, the correct format for the director's correspondence, and approximately 47 other things, all in the time it took to drink 1 cup of coffee. "He's particular," she said, which was the word people use when they mean something more pointed and do not want to commit to it. "Particular how?" I asked. She considered this for a moment. "He doesn't raise his voice," she said finally. "He doesn't need to. And he notices everything. Everything. So be precise. Be accurate. Don't give him reasons to look at you the wrong way." "What does the wrong way look like?" She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "You'll know." Then she gathered her personal items into a tote bag, shook my hand and left, and I was sitting alone at the secretary's desk outside the office of Kang Min-jae for approximately 4 minutes before his door opened. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not dramatically tall, but the kind of tall that has weight. Before we dive into this heartwarming, emotional, slow burn romance Omegaverse story, note, this is an original work of Milliflex channel. If seen in another channel that is not Milliflex, please report that channel for copyright and impersonation. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Behind it, that takes up the correct amount of space and then a little more. He wore a dark charcoal suit that had clearly been made for his specific body, the line of the shoulders too exact, the cut too precise to be off the rack. His face was sharp-featured, handsome in the severe way that architectural things are handsome, and his expression as he looked at me was entirely, disconcertingly neutral. And his scent hit me like a hand placed flat against my sternum. It was the scent from the elevator. That same dark, layered, impossible-to-name thing, closer now and fuller and complex in a way that made my brain tilt sideways for just a moment. Not cedar. Not amber. Not anything I had a word for. It moved over me like a shift in air pressure and then settled, and I felt my composure flicker. I stood up. I clasped my hands in front of me. I held his gaze. "Director Kang. I'm Oh Jin-ho. I'll be your new secretary beginning today." His eyes moved over me once. Not rudely, it was the kind of assessment that contains information gathering rather than judgment, a cataloging look, quick and complete. "I know," he said. His voice was low and even. "Sit down." I sat. He went back into his office without another word. I exhaled very slowly through my nose and pressed my palms flat against my thighs under the desk where he could not see them. "Compose yourself," I told myself firmly. "You are 30 years old. You are a professional. This is a job." I picked up the filing system orientation notes De-eun had left me and began to read. From behind the closed door of his office, I could still just barely catch the edge of that scent, and my pulse did something I chose to ignore entirely. The first 3 months with Kang Min-jae were the most professionally rigorous of my life. He was, as De-eun had warned, particular. He was also brilliant in the unhurried, comprehensive way of people who do not need to perform their intelligence because it is simply present at all times, woven into the fabric of how they move through the world. He read contracts with the speed of someone who had memorized the shape of loopholes. He made decisions in meetings with a stillness that unnerved everyone else in the room. He never raised his voice, and the silence he produced when displeased was worth 10 raised voices from other men. But he was not cruel. That was the thing I had not expected. He was demanding, yes. He corrected mistakes with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. He expected thoroughness and received nothing less. But there was no malice in it. No pleasure in catching errors. He corrected them, expected them not to recur, and moved on, and that was the entirety of his interest in failure. I found, to my own surprise, that I was very good at this job. I had always been organized, an Omega survival mechanism, perhaps, the need to keep the external world controlled when the internal world is prone to such volatility, and Min-jae's requirements sharpened that instinct into something approaching artistry. I learned the rhythm of his days within the first 2 weeks. I learned that he took his coffee black and that he would drink it cold without complaint but preferred it hot, that he had a particular dislike of being handed documents that were not already in priority order, that he scheduled his sharpest thinking for morning and his worst meetings for after 2 in the afternoon, when his patience for stupidity was at its ebb. I learned these things the way you learn them when you pay attention to someone, quietly, incrementally, the way a portrait comes together out of individual brushstrokes. I told myself this was professionalism. His scent was a constant low-level presence in my working days. Not overwhelming, he was careful about it, or perhaps it was simply his nature, but always there at the edge of my awareness like music playing in another room. Dark and grounding and complicated. On the days he passed particularly close to my desk, reaching across me to collect a document or pausing beside me to point at something on my screen, it deepened, and I would feel it move through me like a sound wave through water, gentle and pervasive. I did not allow myself to think too carefully about what that meant. For months I had my heat. I had taken the necessary precautions, suppressants for the first wave, 3 days of planned remote work that I had cleared with HR through the discreet channel the company maintained for Omega employees, a supply kit that I had assembled with the grim efficiency of someone who has done this many times before. I sent Min Jae a formal note the day before. Director Kong, I will be working remotely from Thursday through Saturday due to a personal health matter. All scheduled tasks have been prepared in advance. Please find attached the briefing documents for the Friday board presentation. He replied in 3 words, understood. Take care. I stared at those 3 words for longer than was reasonable. In the quiet of my apartment, alone with the heat and the suppressants that blunted the worst edges but could not eliminate the ache entirely, I pressed my face into my pillow and tried not to think about dark, layered scents. I was not entirely successful. When I returned to the office the following Monday, Min Jae did not remark on my absence. He simply handed me a revised schedule for the week and said, the Friday presentation was well received, and something in his voice when he said it, something careful and deliberate, made me look up at him. He was already looking at me. For a moment, just one moment, the length of a held breath, something moved in his expression that I could not read. Not the usual neutrality. Something beneath that. Something that had heat in it. Then he turned and walked back into his office and I sat very still at my desk, and the quiet between us felt different after that, though I could not have said exactly how. It is the small things that betray a person. Not the grand gestures. Those can be managed, contained, attributed to professionalism or politeness or any number of reasonable explanations. It is the small things that accumulate in the corners of a relationship like dust in sunlight, visible only when the angle changes. Min Jae began noticing things about me. I did not recognize it immediately as what it was. I recognized it first as a change in pattern, a series of small deviations from the established routine of our working dynamic that my organized brain flagged without yet interpreting. He stopped walking past my desk on the way to the elevator. Instead he paused. Sometimes he asked questions that were not about work. Not intrusive questions. Min Jae was incapable of intrusive but quiet ones. Did you eat? There's a place on the corner that does good guk. Or you look tired. The harem account is not worth your sleep. Once, on a particularly late evening when I was still at my desk at 9 o'clock and everyone else had long gone, he appeared in his doorway in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened, and said with the particular weight of someone, choosing words carefully, Jin-ho. Go home. I'm almost done, I said without looking up. You're always almost done. Pause. I'll still be here tomorrow. I looked up then. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, and in the low amber light of the office after hours, he looked different than he did during the day. Less like a CEO. More like a person. So will the report, I said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Min Jae did not smile the way other people smiled, fully and without reservation, but the shadow of something. Stubborn, he said. Thorough, I corrected. He made a sound that might, from someone else, have been a laugh. Then he pushed himself off the door frame and went back into his office, and my heart was doing something entirely inappropriate in my chest, and I pressed my hand flat against my sternum for a moment before returning to the report. Stop it, I told myself. He is your employer. He is an alpha. You know what happens when alphas try to handle you. But his scent that evening in the emptied office was richer than it was during the day. Closer. It wrapped around me in the late quiet air and I felt it in my sternum, in the back of my throat, in the palms of my hands, and I sat with it and breathed very carefully and did not allow myself to want anything. I was quite accomplished at not allowing myself to want things. The problem was that I was starting to fail at it. I noticed in the 7th month that he watched me more than he used to. Not obtrusively, Min Jae was too contained for anything obvious. But when I stood in his office doorway to relay a message, I caught his eyes tracking the line of my posture before they returned to my face. When I reached across the conference table to collect documents after a meeting, there was a stillness in him that had the texture of deliberate restraint. When our hands made accidental contact reaching for the same folder, just once, just briefly, I felt the contact run the entire length of my nervous system, and I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He noticed that I had noticed. I saw it in the way he became very still for just a fraction of a second. Neither of us said anything. We were both, I realized, very skilled at not saying things. He brought me coffee once. This was remarkable. Min Jae had never, in 7 months, brought anyone coffee. I was at my desk reviewing correspondence when he appeared beside me, set a cup down without comment and walked away. I looked at the cup. The coffee was black because he took his coffee black, but there was a small sealed cup of honey on the side. He knew I sweetened my coffee with honey. I had never told him that. I sat with this information for a long moment, and something I had been keeping carefully behind a wall in my chest pushed very hard against that wall, and I had to work to keep it contained. I added the honey to my coffee. I drank it slowly. It was perfect. I learned in pieces what Min Jae had carried. Not from him directly. He was not a man who revealed himself easily or soon. But I was his secretary, which meant I was adjacent to every interaction he had, and people talk around secretaries the way they talk around furniture, which is to say carelessly. I knew that he had been in a relationship 3 years ago. An Omega named Lee Jun-seo who had been, by all accounts, beautiful and kind and deeply unsuited to Min Jae's particular nature. I heard this from the company's director of operations, who mentioned it in passing in the way that people in offices know each other's histories. Jun-seo had left, apparently. Had said that Min Jae was too much to manage. Had said that being with him felt like standing too close to something generating an enormous amount of heat. Necessary to approach, overwhelming to sustain. I turned this over in my mind for days afterward. Too much. The same phrase Hyun had used about me pointed in the opposite direction. It struck me with a peculiar clarity that Kang Min Jae and I were each, in our separate ways, carrying the particular damage of having been told we were too much for the people who claimed to want us. I did not say this to him. There was no framework in our professional relationship for conversations of that depth, and Min Jae did not invite them, and I was not yet brave enough to extend one. But something in the knowledge settled in me like a key fitting a lock it was not yet turning. And then there were the things I noticed about his scent. I was elite Omega enough to have an extremely refined olfactory sensitivity, and Min Jae's scent continued to confound my ability to categorize it. It was not alpha. I was certain of this. I had been close enough to enough alphas in my life to know the particular quality of their pheromones, the specific warmth, the way an alpha scent tends to press outward against the air with a kind of territorial confidence. Min Jae's scent did not do this. It moved differently. It pulled rather than pushed. It was deep and complex, and it reached into the furthest registers of my sensitivity and touched things there that no alpha scent ever had. I spent a week wondering if he was a beta. But betas have almost no scent, and his scent was definitively, inarguably present. I could not work out what he was. I did not ask. It was not my place to ask, and Min Jae's designation was his to share or not share, and I respected that. But the mystery of it ran underneath my consciousness like that river current, always there, always moving. It was a Thursday in October, 10 months into my tenure at Jaesung Corporation, when everything changed. We had been working late, genuinely late, past 11, on a merger contract that needed to be ready for a 7 a.m. presentation in Tokyo. The building had emptied hours ago. The city lights burned through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Min Jae's office, where we had been working at his desk together, side by side, the way we sometimes worked when a task required two minds and urgency had dissolved the usual geometry of our separate positions. I was aware of him differently in the late-night office. The day's careful professional architecture had softened. His jacket was over the back of his chair. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His hair had fallen slightly out of its daytime precision. He smelled different in the late hours, warmer and richer and more present, as if the controlled public version of his scent gave way to something truer when the audience was gone. I had been ignoring it for hours. I was very good at ignoring it. But there is a threshold past which even the most disciplined body decides it has been ignored long enough. He leaned over the document we were both reviewing, one hand braced on the desk beside mine, and his face was close, too close, the kind of close that the daytime would never have permitted, and his scent wrapped around me completely, no distance to dilute it, and something in my chest cracked open like a fault line in a cliff face. I stopped reading. He stopped reading. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. "Jin Ho," he said, and his voice was different, low and stripped of its professional layer, and it was the first time he had said my name without the formal address, without the distance, just the two syllables of it, and they landed on me like a hand. "Don't," I said. My voice was not steady. "I haven't done anything." "You were about to." Pause. "Yes," he said, which was so honestly Min Jae, no deflection, no pretense. I turned to look at him. We were very close. Close enough that I could see the exact line of his jaw, the slight tension in it. His eyes were dark and careful and full of something he had been carrying for a long time. "Min Jae, I said. "Don't," he said, and his voice had something in it I had not heard before, something rougher underneath the control, like discovering the grain of wood beneath lacquer. "Don't put the title back." My heart was hammering. My entire body was at attention in the specific way of an elite Omega who is feeling something very large. "I don't know what you are," I said. It came out quieter than I intended. "What do you mean?" "Your designation." I held his gaze. "You're not an alpha." I've known that for months. But I can't. No, he said. I'm not an alpha. Then what are you? He was quiet for a moment. The city lights shifted through the window behind him. When he spoke, his voice was very even, the way it is when someone is choosing to trust you with something they have kept carefully private. Enigma, he said. I had read about enigmas. Every Omega had, at some point, as part of the education system's designation literature, rare enough to be near mythological, a designation that the scientific community was still debating the full parameters of. An enigma had an alpha's strength and dominance with none of an alpha's biological compulsion to control. They produced pheromones that were incomparably complex, that interacted with omega biology differently than typical alpha pheromones, that could meet the full register of an elite omega's sensitivity without overwhelming it. They were partners rather than dominants. They were rare enough that most people went their whole lives never meeting one. They were the only designation that could, theoretically, fully match an elite omega. The full weight of this realization moved through me slowly like floodwater, irresistible and all-encompassing. Min-jae, I said. Yes. That means? Yes, he said again. And then very quietly, I know what you are, Jin-ho. I've known since your first day. You're sent. A pause, and something shifted in his expression. The neutrality finally, fully giving way to something underneath it that had clearly been under considerable pressure for a long time. I've been trying very hard to be appropriate about it. So have I whispered. The silence between us stretched, and in it was every month of careful distance, every avoided glance, every small withdrawal and considered restraint. All of it sitting there between us, present and acknowledged and finally unnecessary. He lifted his hand and touched my face. He was gentle about it, the back of 2 fingers against my cheek, tentative in the way of someone who has imagined a moment so many times that touching it feels almost dangerous. His skin was warm. My breath caught. Tell me to stop, he said. I'm not going to tell you to stop, I said. He exhaled, a long, controlled exhale that contained, I thought, a great deal of relief, and then his hand moved, cradling my jaw fully, and he tilted my face up toward his and he kissed me. Softly first. Just the press of his lips against mine, unhurried, deliberate. He kissed the way he did everything, with complete attention, every fraction of awareness trained on it. My hands found his shirt, gripping the fabric over his chest, and I felt the steady hammer of his heart under my palm, and the knowledge that he was not calm, that he was containing the same enormity I was, made something in me give way entirely. The kiss deepened. His arm came around my waist, pulling me against him, and his scent enveloped me completely, that dark, complex, irresistible thing, and up close and at full intensity it was the most overwhelming sensory experience of my life. It went through me like electricity through water, reaching every nerve ending simultaneously, and I made a sound against his mouth that I had no control over. He pulled back. His breathing was not steady. His eyes, when they met mine, were dark and searching. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, I said. That's your scent at full? I can pull it back. Don't, I said immediately. Please don't. Something moved in his expression. Something that was not quite a smile but was warmer than anything I had ever seen on his face. Jin-ho, he said, my name in his voice like he was learning the shape of it. I should tell you something. Before anything else. I know what you're going to say. Do you? The last Omega you were with, they couldn't handle you. A beat. Yes. And you've been afraid that with me because of how I am, how sensitive I am, that I'd be fragile, he said. The word had weight in it. Yes. You look very delicate, I said. Came out slightly bitter without my meaning it to. His hand on my jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, he said, and his voice was very firm. Not delicate. Just precious. There is a difference. One suggests breakability. The other is about value. I stared at him. No one had ever made that distinction before. Min-jae, I said, and my voice did something I was not proud of. It wavered. You need to know that I'm not a simple Omega. What I need, what I feel, it runs at a higher register than. I know, he said. An elite Omega. His thumb moved against my jaw, a small steady motion. I know what that means. I know what you need. And I'm telling you, I'm the only designation that can give it to you. The simplicity of his certainty was staggering. No apology in it. No hesitation. Just fact delivered the way Min-jae delivered all facts. Don't make promises, I said. I don't make promises, he said. I make statements of fact. And then he kissed me again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This is where language begins to feel insufficient. I will say only this. He was not gentle after that first soft kiss, and I did not want him to be. He was thorough and attentive and overwhelming in the specific way that an enigma is overwhelming, not the raw territorial press of an alpha but something deeper and more complete, something that found the full register of my sensitivity and matched it perfectly, that met every heightened response my body produced with an answering steadiness that was the most devastating thing I had ever encountered. I had spent 2 years with an alpha who had told me I was too much. Min Jae met every inch of me like I was precisely enough. We stayed in his office until the city lights began to pale toward dawn, and when I finally pressed my face against his shoulder in the early morning stillness, breathing in his scent with the full depth of my lungs, I felt something I had not felt in years. Safe. And known. And not too much at all. The morning after is where most beautiful things fall apart. I have learned this from experience. The terrible cold clarity that descends when the warmth of the previous night has to be renegotiated in daylight. I braced for it on the elevator ride down from the 42nd floor, shoes in my hand, hair somewhat less precisely arranged than usual, the October pre-dawn cold against the lobby windows. Min Jae walked me to the elevator himself. This was notable. He was a man who generally concluded interactions and returned to work. He walked me to the elevator and stood in front of me while the doors took their time opening, and his expression in the pale morning light was very serious. "I don't do this lightly," he said. "I know that," I said. "I want to be clear about what last night was for me." "What was it?" He was quiet for a moment, the way he is when he is choosing the exact right word rather than the approximate one. "A beginning," he said finally. "Not a single thing." My heart expanded painfully in my chest. "Min Jae, I understand if you need time. I understand if this complicates your position here. I will not make it uncomfortable for you regardless of what you decide. Pause. But I want you to know what I want. I want a beginning." The elevator opened. I stepped inside and turned to face him and looked at him for a long moment. This tall, severe, complicated man with dark layered pheromones and no ability to produce a full smile but who had kissed me like I was something worth being careful with. "I don't need time," I said. Something in his face eased. "Just slightly." "Good," he said. The doors closed. I leaned against the elevator wall and pressed both hands over my mouth and did something I had not done in a very long time. I smiled until my face ached with it. We did not hide it from the office exactly, but we were discreet. Min Jae's decision as much as mine. He was a private person. His professional reputation was also the armor he wore against a world that found him frightening, and adding a romantic complication to the public narrative felt, to both of us, like unnecessary exposure. But within the office things shifted visibly to anyone who cared to look. He still expected precision and thoroughness from me. He still corrected errors without apology. But there was a new register to his attention. Not softness exactly, because Min Jae did not do softness in any conventional way, but a specificity of care that communicated the same thing differently. He noticed when I skipped lunch and appeared in my doorway with takeout containers and the expression of a man who considers nourishing people a form of speaking. He learned to send me a particular calendar invitation, always labeled internal discussion. That was in reality a reminder to stop working and come sit in his office for 10 minutes, where we would drink coffee and say very little but exist in the same space in a way that felt like the most natural thing I had ever experienced. He was not a man who spoke his feelings easily, but he showed them with the same precision and intentionality that he brought to everything else, exactly, completely, and in exactly the right amount. And when the office was empty and the city darkened outside the windows, he was different again. The professional layer fully gone. He would pull me into his arms with a directness that still surprised me, not roughly, but with the complete confidence of someone who has decided on a thing and committed to it without reservation, and hold me against his chest while his hand moved through my hair, and his scent would deepen around me until I was wrapped entirely in it, and I would feel myself come completely undone and completely together at the same time. One evening, 3 weeks in, I pressed my face against his collarbone and said, "I was told I was too much." His hand stilled in my hair for a moment. Then, with great care, he pressed his lips to the top of my head. "By someone with insufficient capacity," he said. "And you have sufficient capacity?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have been told," he said, "that I am too much. Too contained. Too demanding. Too difficult." Pause. "Perhaps we should simply agree that the previous assessments were made by the wrong people." I pressed closer and did not trust my voice for a moment. "Yes," I said when I had it back. "I think that's right." My second heat came in January, for months into what I had begun calling, in the privacy of my own mind, us, the word still small and careful but present. I had been managing heats alone for years. The routine was established, clinical, grim in its efficiency. 3 days, suppressants at the minimum effective dose to keep the worst edges off, isolation, the particular variety of ache that has no good solution. This time Min Jae asked, Not in a dramatic way. He asked the way he asked everything, directly, with the full weight of his attention behind it and no performance around it. We were sitting in his living room on a Sunday evening. I had begun spending Sunday evenings at his apartment, a progression that had happened so naturally and inevitably that I had not noticed it until it had already become routine, and he said, "Your heat is in 3 weeks." I looked at him. Yes. Do you want to be alone? I opened my mouth to say yes, automatically, the old instinct, and stopped. No, I said. The word came out simple and true. I don't. But, and here I hesitated because this was the part that had always been the problem, the part that had broken what was before. Min-jae, I need you to understand what that means. For me specifically. It's not like a typical Omega heat. The intensity is. Jin-ho. He looked at me with complete calm. I am an enigma. I am made for this. I stared at him. Not just biologically, he said, and his voice dropped, and it had that quality it sometimes had in the late evenings, richer and lower and direct in a way that went straight to the center of me. I want to be there. I want to take care of you. All of what you are. The word all undid me. Okay, I said, and my voice was barely a sound. Okay, he agreed. And he was right. He was made for it. Not in any inadequate or diminishing way. He did not merely tolerate the depth of my heat, he matched it. Every wave of it that hit me, every overwhelming pulse of need that an elite Omega's heat produces in its full triple intensity reality, he was there, steady and encompassing, his scent around me like a living thing. His hands on my skin were sure and deliberate, his attention complete, his care absolutely without hesitation. At some point during the first night I said, voice wrecked, "You're not," and could not finish the sentence. He pressed his lips to my temple. Not overwhelmed, he said. Not going anywhere. I held onto him with both hands and pressed my face into his neck and breathed, and the relief that moved through me, not just physical but something years deep, was the largest thing I had ever felt. He held me afterward for hours. I did not sleep. I lay with my ear against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, which was slower than mine. Min-jae's heartbeat was always slower than mine, the unhurried pace of someone who conserves energy for what matters, and I felt the steady movement of his breathing and the weight of his arm across me. Tell me something, I said into the quiet. What would you like to know? When you figured out what you were. Enigma. How old were you? He was quiet for a moment. 19, he said. My family didn't know what to do with the information. The designation is documented but rare enough to be practically mythological. My father was Alpha. He did not know how to relate to something he could not categorize. Pause. I decided early that the most efficient response was to not explain myself and allow people to assume whatever was most comfortable for them. An alpha, I said. It was the simplest inference. I don't present dominance the way alphas do, but people interpret control as dominance because it's what they know how to read. And the terror, I said with just the very edge of humor in my voice. Something moved in his chest, almost a laugh. Almost. That came naturally, he said without apology. I smiled against his skin. And Jun Seo? I said carefully. Pause. He was a good Omega, he said. We suited each other in some ways. Not in the fundamental ways. A breath. I've been told that I'm difficult to be close to. The density of what I am, not just the designation but the entirety of it. It requires a certain capacity. I know a little something about that, I said softly. His arm tightened around me. I know you do, he said. That was part of what drew me in the beginning. The sense that you were navigating a particular loneliness. We were both strange, I said. We are both strange, he agreed. Our strangeness suits each other. He pressed his lips to my hair, and his scent wrapped around me completely, and in the warm dark of his room I thought, yes, this is the one. This is the person made out of the right strangeness for mine. The year that followed was the quietest and most complete year of my life. Quiet not in the absence of things. We were busy both of us, the pace of Min-jae's company demanding and relentless, my work beside him as complex and absorbing as ever, but quiet in the way of a room that has been furnished correctly. No rattling. No drag. The right things in the right places, producing a stillness that is not emptiness but sufficiency. We established rhythms, the way two people do when they are genuinely building something rather than merely cohabiting. Sunday evenings became inviolable. The small coffee ritual each morning before the workday properly began. 10 minutes at his kitchen counter, both of us in varying states of wakefulness, saying almost nothing, the honey on the side of my cup a small constant. He learned, over months, which precise combination of factors indicated that I was having a difficult day, a particular set to my shoulders, a way of going very quiet that was different from my ordinary quiet, and would appear beside me without comment and do something small, refill my tea, pass me a document I'd need in the next 5 minutes before I knew I needed it, place a hand briefly at the small of my back in passing with a pressure that said I see you with no accompanying words. I learned him too. Learned that the days he was most silent were not the difficult days, those he processed efficiently and moved through. The genuinely difficult days were the ones he was most precise and clipped, the ones where the controlled exterior was doing the most work. On those days I brought him coffee without being asked and sat in his office while he worked and did not try to make conversation, just was there, a quiet presence in the room, and I watched the tension in his shoulders ease incrementally. We were not demonstrative in public. Min Jae was not built for public demonstrativeness and I respected that completely. But in private he was the most physically present person I had ever been close to, always some point of contact, a hand at my waist, my back against his chest while we read, his thumb running along my knuckles when we sat beside each other. Small, steady geometries of affection that accumulated over months into something I could measure the weight of. He told me he loved me on a Wednesday. Not a significant Wednesday. Not an anniversary or a holiday or any kind of occasion that would have made the declaration feel staged. A completely ordinary Wednesday in April, 11 months into us, when I had just finished compiling a report that had taken 3 days and I was sitting at my desk feeling the specific exhaustion of completed effort, and he appeared in the doorway of his office and looked at me across the space between us with that careful, complete attention of his, and said, "Jin Ho." I did not look up immediately. "I love you." I looked up. He was standing in his doorway in his full daytime armor, the impeccable suit, the composed expression, and he said it the way he said everything that mattered, without performance, without preamble, just the plain truth of it delivered directly. I felt it hit me in the center of my chest and radiate outward to every peripheral point of my body. "Min Jae," I said. "Yes. It's Wednesday. I'm aware. We have a board meeting in 40 minutes. Also aware." I stared at him. "You couldn't wait until?" "I could have," he said. I decided not to. I pressed my lips together against a smile that was trying very hard to happen. "Why?" He considered this with the same seriousness he considered everything. "I've been carrying it long enough," he said. It felt inefficient to continue withholding it. This was, definitively, the most Min Jae way anyone had ever said "I love you" in the entire history of human language, and it was the most perfect thing I had ever heard. "I love you too," I said, and my voice was not even trying to be steady. "I have for months." I was waiting for a more appropriate moment. "There are no more appropriate moments," he said. "There are only moments." I stood up from my desk and crossed the room to him and stood in front of him and tilted my face up. His expression when I was this close always shifted, the controlled neutrality giving way at the edges, warmth moving through the architecture of it like light through glass. He kissed me there in the office doorway at 10:40 in the morning with the city blazing outside the windows and the board meeting 40 minutes away, and it was unhurried and thorough and tasted like the best Wednesday of my life. "We have a meeting," I said against his mouth. 40 minutes, he said. "That's sufficient." I laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that comes from the chest without warning, and he made that almost sound against my hair, and we stood there for a moment in the doorway with the sunlight hitting the windows and the city going about its business far below, and it was the simplest and most complete thing I had ever been part of. We told the world in increments which suited both of us. First, his closest colleague, director Yu Sang-hyun, who had known Min Jae for 15 years and who reacted to the information with a long silence followed by a look in my direction that contained both assessment and approval. Sang-hyun was beta, uncomplicated by designation dynamics, and he took to me with the straightforward warmth of someone who was simply relieved that his friend had found a reason to occasionally look less like he was calculating something and more like he was present in his own life. Second, my parents. This was the dinner I spent 3 days preparing for internally, arranging and rearranging possible conversation trajectories in my mind with the anxious thoroughness of an elite omega who processes threat through organization. My mother cried. Not from distress. From the first moment she saw Min Jae across the restaurant table, she did something I recognized from childhood. She went quiet and assessing in the way that meant she was reading the situation for my safety, scanning for the specific quality of a person's regard for her son. And what she found in Min Jae's regard for me must have answered every question she had, because her eyes filled up quietly and she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Jin Hoya, you look peaceful," and that was the end of the evaluation. My father shook Min Jae's hand for a long time. He was a man of few words and great depth, my father, and what he communicated in that handshake was sufficient. Min Jae, for his part, was extraordinary. Not warm in the effusive way that might have felt false, he was not effusive and falseness was constitutionally impossible for him, but respectful and genuinely attentive, asking my father about his work with the kind of real curiosity that cannot be faked, listening to my mother's stories about my childhood with the focused attention he gave everything, which in this context made her glow with the particular pleasure of someone whose child is being genuinely known. In the car on the way back, I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the city going by and felt something enormous and soft in my chest. "Thank you," I said. He glanced at me briefly. "For what?" "For being real with them. You didn't perform." He was quiet for a moment. "They love you," he said. "They deserved realness." I turned my face toward the window so he could not see the full magnitude of my expression. "Min-jae," I said. I'm going to need you to pull over for a minute." Pause. "Why?" "Because I need to kiss you and I can't wait until we get home." The briefest silence. Then he indicated, pulled smoothly to the curb of the quiet side street, turned off the engine, and turned to me with the expression that was not quite a smile but was entirely and completely warm. "You are," he said, "the most dramatic Omega I have ever met." "You love it," I said. "Entirely," he agreed and kissed me with his hand cradling my face and the city lights catching in his dark eyes, and I thought, yes, this is exactly the life I almost didn't believe I could have. It was a Saturday night in June 1 year and 7 months into us, when Min-jae told me the full truth of what he was and what it had cost him. We were at his apartment. I had moved half my things there by this point in the gradual, undeclared way of two people who have simply made a decision with their bodies before their mouths have caught up. I was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with documents spread around me, a bad habit he had given up trying to correct, and he was on the sofa with a book, and the apartment had that settled, inhabited quiet that I had come to love more than almost anything. He said, out of apparent nowhere, "Do you know the full research on Enigma designation?" I looked up. "Some of it. What I learned in school and what I've found since." He closed his book and set it aside and looked at me with the expression that meant he was preparing to say something that required more of him than usual. I uncrossed my legs and moved to sit on the sofa beside him, giving him my full attention. "The density of it," he began slowly, "is genuinely difficult for most people to be near for extended periods. It's not, I don't project aggression or dominance the way an alpha does. But what I produce pheromone-wise is layered and complex, and it creates an intensity of environmental pressure that most designations cannot sustain long-term exposure to." Pause. Jun Seo spent the last 3 months of our relationship having tension headaches that his physician couldn't explain. When he left, the headaches stopped within a week. I was quiet. "He was a typical Omega," Min-jae said. "His sensitivity threshold was normal range. What I produced was simply more than his system could integrate." He looked at his hands for a moment. "He wasn't weak. I want to be clear about that. It was a genuine incompatibility. But the knowledge that my presence had been causing him pain, that I hadn't known, that I couldn't have known until he told me, that was." He stopped. "That was difficult." "Min-jae," I said. "I made a decision after Jun Seo," he said looking at me, "to remain alone. Indefinitely. The risk of repeating that, of being a source of harm to someone through something I cannot control or moderate." His jaw tightened slightly. It seemed like the responsible conclusion. "And then I walked into your office," I said softly. Something moved in his expression. "And then you walked into my office," he agreed. "And your scent reached me before you'd even crossed the lobby because you're elite Omega and your receptivity radius is—" He stopped again. "Breathe." It was the first time in 3 years that what I produce had met something that could receive it fully. Without strain. Without the incompatibility. He looked at me very steadily. "I knew immediately what you were. And I spent 10 months being very careful about doing nothing about it." "Because you were afraid of hurting me?" I said. "Yes." "The way you'd hurt Jun Seo?" "Yes." "Except that you are, the intensity of what you are as an elite Omega, the heightened sensitivity, the elevated receptivity, it should have made you more vulnerable to the problem. Not less." He shook his head slightly. "But it works the other way. The same quality that made ordinary alphas too simple for you makes an Enigma's complexity not an excess but a match. You process what I produce not as an overwhelming signal but as a frequency I can hear," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "Exactly that." I reached out and took his hand, which was not something I usually initiated. Min-jae was the initiator, typically the one who reached, and I laced my fingers through his and held on. "You are not a danger to me," I said. "You are the opposite of a danger to me. You are the first thing in my life that has ever been exactly the right size for what I am." His grip on my hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "And you," he said, his voice rough at the edges in a way I only heard occasionally, the rare occasions when something moved through the controlled exterior with enough force to color it, "are the first person who has ever made me feel that what I am is not a problem requiring management." The silence afterward was the kind that holds something too large for any additional words. I leaned into his shoulder and he brought our joined hands to his lips and pressed them there, and we sat together in the settled quiet of the apartment with the summer night outside the windows, and I understood, in that moment, the specific shape of what we had built. Two people who had each been told in different languages that they were too much. Who had each carried that verdict with the specific dignity of the chronically misunderstood. Who had found each other and discovered that too much, applied to the right person, simply means enough. He asked me on a Thursday morning. Another unremarkable day of the week. Min Jae and his absolute refusal to perform sentiment through occasion. It was February, cold and bright, and I had arrived at the office 17 minutes before him as usual and was setting up the morning briefing when he walked in, coat still on, and came directly to my desk. I looked up. He set a small dark box on my desk without preamble. I stared at it. Jin-ho, he said. Min Jae. Marry me. Not will you marry me? Not a question at all, technically, which was so exactly him that it split my heart open with affection. That's not a question, I said, and my voice was doing something completely outside my control. It is a question, he said. I'm simply asking it with a different inflection. The inflection of a man who has already decided. The inflection, he said, of a man who would like very much for you to say yes. I looked at the box. I looked at him. His face was as controlled as always, but his eyes had that depth of warmth in them that I had learned to read over 2 years, the one he showed only to me, the one he probably didn't know his face produced but it did, every time he looked at me with his guard fully down. Min Jae, I said. Yes. You terrified an entire boardroom last week. Sang Hyun's eyes said one of the new executives cried. Pause. That's. And you are standing at my desk at 8 in the morning in your coat asking me to marry you by stating it as a business proposal. His jaw shifted. I didn't. And it's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me in my entire life. He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his face, that almost smile, present and undeniable. Yes or no, Jin-ho, he said, and his voice had the rough warmth in it. I opened the box. The ring inside was simple and precise. White gold, clean-lined, no excess, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. He had known. Yes, I said. Obviously yes. Min Jae, it was always going to be yes. He exhaled. One controlled breath that contained the entirety of a man who does not permit himself impatience very often but had been holding this particular breath for some time. He took the ring from the box and slid it onto my finger with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, and then he held my hand for a moment and looked at it, and his thumb moved across my knuckle in that small, steady motion. Good, he said. I laughed. That's all? Good. He looked up at me and his face was open in a way it very rarely was, the full warmth of him present without any of the constructed neutral surface, and he said very quietly, I have approximately 40 things I would like to say. None of them are adequate. Try one, I said. He was quiet for a moment. You made me stop being afraid of what I am, he said. I don't have a sufficient follow-up to that sentence. I stood up from my desk and went around it and wrapped my arms around him, pressing my face into his neck, and he held me with both arms in the full, encompassing way he had, the way that was not gentle, exactly, but was entirely safe, and his sense surrounded me completely. You did the same for me, I said into his collar. His arms tightened. We stood like that in the empty early morning office for a long time, the city waking up far below us, and the ring on my finger caught the light each time I shifted, and I thought, miracle. My mother was right. That is the word after all. We were married in May. Small ceremony, 40 people, which was 40 more than Min Jae had initially proposed and the number I negotiated him up to over 3 weeks of patient discussion. My mother wore a pale green dress and cried for most of the afternoon in the specific way of someone who is profoundly happy and has an excess of feeling about it. My father shook Min Jae's hand again, longer than the first time, and said 3 words to him that I was not close enough to hear, and whatever they were, Min Jae nodded once and his expression did the thing it does only in the presence of something that genuinely moves him. Sang Hyun gave a speech that was mercifully short and contained exactly one joke, about the number of years he had watched Min Jae be terrifying to everyone in a 10-kilometer radius and had been waiting for someone to render him human. He is still terrifying, I said from my seat beside my husband. Yes, Sang Hyun agreed. But now he's your problem. Min Jae beside me said, Sang Hyun. Sir. Wrap it up. The table laughed and Min Jae did not, but the corner of his mouth did something that was honestly almost a full smile, and I bumped my shoulder against his and he looked at me sideways with that depth of warmth and I thought, there it is. There is the face no one else gets to see. When we danced, the mandatory first dance, which Min Jae had conceded to with the dignity of a man accepting a necessary tax. He held me properly, one hand at my back and one hand holding mine, and we moved slowly in the way of people who are not particularly thinking about dancing. "Are you happy?" I asked him quietly because it was one of those moments where I needed to hear it said plainly. He looked down at me. "What do you think?" he said in that low even voice. "I think yes. But I want you to say it." Pause. Then, "Yes, Jin-ho. I'm happy." And then, after another moment as if he was deciding to add it, "I have never been this happy." I pressed closer to him, my hand tightening in his, and felt the steady solid warmth of him around me and the deepening of his scent that happened when he was at ease, and I closed my eyes for a moment and just existed inside the fact of it. Happy. The word felt different, worn than it had imagined. Quieter. More permanent. I am 32 years old. I live in an apartment in Mapo that is too large for two people and exactly the right size for everything we have put into it. The shared rhythms, the settled furniture, the specific light that comes through the east-facing windows on mornings when the sky is clear, which is the light I like best. I still work at J-Sung Corporation. This is, technically speaking, a human resources complexity that required a formal agreement and significant paperwork when our relationship became known to the board, and Min Jae managed the entire process with the same composure he brings to hostile takeovers, and none of the board members said anything they were not comfortable defending in writing. I am no longer his secretary. I am now the chief of staff for the executive division, which is a position Min Jae created specifically around my actual function in the company and which caused Sang Hyun to say, "You basically invented a job title so you could keep him next to you," and Min Jae to say, "I invented an accurate job title for an existing role, with no trace of defensiveness whatsoever." He still brings me coffee with honey on the side. Some mornings I am still the first one up, and I make his coffee and set it on the counter and lean against the kitchen island and wait, and I hear him before I see him, the deliberate unhurried sound of his footsteps, which I know as well as I know my own heartbeat, and he comes into the kitchen in the state I love best, which is early morning Min Jae before the day's armor is fully assembled, shirt not yet buttoned at the collar, hair slightly undone, the full quietness of him present. He takes the coffee. He drinks it. He looks at me over the rim of the cup. "Good morning," I say. He says. This is the entirety of our morning greeting and it contains everything. He is still terrifying to most people. This has not changed, has not softened, is simply a fact of what he is and how he moves through the world. Boardrooms still reorganize themselves around his presence. New employees still require a period of adjustment. At a company dinner last year, a junior manager spilled an entire glass of water when Min Jae addressed him directly, and I kept my expression perfectly composed from across the table while quietly dying inside. "You were never afraid of me," Min Jae said afterward in the car home, with the particular thoughtfulness of a man turning something over. I said. "A little. At the beginning." He glanced at me. "You didn't show it." I had nothing to gain from showing it. I paused. And it was very quickly replaced by something else. "What?" "Curiosity," I said. And then wanting. The car moved through the night city. His hand found mine on the center console without looking, and I felt his thumb against my knuckle in that small, steady motion. "I wanted you from the first day," he said, which was not information I hadn't known, but which still moved through me with undiminished weight. "Your scent hit me in the lobby before you'd reached the reception desk." "You were at the elevator," I said, suddenly certain of it. "That morning." "That's whose scent that was." Pause. "Yes." "You came down to the lobby." Another pause. "I had reviewed your resume," he said with great precision. "I wanted to form an initial assessment." "You wanted to see me?" I said. A very long pause this time. "Yes," he said finally, with the tone of a man conceding a point in negotiation. I smiled in the dark of the car. "Kang Min Jae," I said. "Oh Jin-ho," he returned. "I love you very much." "I know." And then because he always says it back, always, "I love you." Equally. I turned my face toward the window and watched the city lights stream past and felt the ring on my finger and the warmth of his hand over mine and the steady layered complexity of his scent in the enclosed space of the car, and I thought about the version of me that spent 4 days alone in a university dorm room at 22, pressing my face into a pillow and begging for something I couldn't name. I thought about the version of me that sat on the edge of a bed at 27 and listened to someone say "you're too much" in a tired, flat voice and believed them. I thought about the version of me that walked into a lobby in Gangnam at 30 with a resume folder pressed to my chest and a carefully constructed composure and caught the edge of something in the air, dark and layered and impossible to categorize, and stepped into an elevator. And I thought about Min Jae at 19, alone with a designation no one had a shelf for. Min Jae at 28, sitting with the knowledge that his presence had caused headaches for someone he cared about. Min Jae deciding to remain alone. Making peace with that decision. Carrying it. Two people building their walls with great deliberateness and great exhaustion. And then the walls finding each other. My heat came last month. I am at the point now where I do not dread them. This is a statement I could not have made at any previous point in my life, and I hold it with the particular reverence of something hard won. Min Jae was home. He is always home now when it comes. He takes the days off without announcement, without explanation to anyone who asks, with the implacable composure of a man who has identified his priority and arranged everything else accordingly. The first evening, when the heat settled in fully and I felt the familiar wave of it, but different now, held differently, the enormity of it no longer something to brace against alone, I pressed myself against him and breathed in his scent and felt his arms come fully around me. "You're all right," he said into my hair. "I know," I said. "I know I am. I have you. I know that too." He pulled back enough to look at my face, and his expression was everything. All of it, all of the things he does not say easily and says perfectly in other ways, present and legible to me in the full language of him that I have spent 2 years learning. He kissed my forehead. Then my temple. Then the corner of my mouth, soft and deliberate, each touch placed with the attention he gives everything that matters to him. "Jin-ho," he said. "Yes," I said, and I meant all of it. The name, the question underneath the name, the answer to every version of it he would ever ask. He kissed me properly then, slow and deep and unhurried in the way that still, after everything, rearranges my entire nervous system. His hands moving to my face, tilting me up toward him, and his scent deepening around us until I was wrapped entirely in it, until there was nothing in the room but this, the specific and irreplaceable fact of us. And I thought for the last time about the word miracle. Not the miracle of being born to 2 betas. Not the miracle of a designation so rare it appears in footnotes. Those things were accidents of biology, strange gifts from a random universe. The actual miracle was simpler. It was this. That the specific strangeness of what I am found, in a world of 8 billion people, the specific strangeness of what he is. That we were both too much. That too much, in each other's hands, became exactly, completely, irrevocably enough.